My father's workshop was the one room in our house I was never allowed to enter. Not with a lock, not with a warning sign, not with any dramatic speech about consequences. Just a door at the end of the hall in our house in Boise, Idaho that was always shut, and a quiet, consistent understanding that it stayed that way. My father, Robert Hale, was not a secretive man by nature. He coached my little league team when I was 8. He taught me to drive in an empty parking lot behind the Albertsons on Fairview Avenue. He sat with me in the emergency room at St. Luke's when I broke my collarbone junior year of high school and held my hand without making it weird. He was the kind of father who showed up, which is why the door never bothered me much. Every family has its closed doors. You learn to live around them. My name is Miles Hale. I'm 42 years old. I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Boise. I assess load-bearing capacity for a living, which, looking back now, is almost funny, because I spent most of my adult life never once stopping to wonder what my father was holding up from the inside. Robert Hale died on February 11, 2023. He was 71 years old. It was a stroke. Sudden. Catastrophic. The kind that doesn't give you time to say anything you meant to say. He was there on a Tuesday and gone by Wednesday morning, and the thing about that kind of loss is that it doesn't feel real for a while. You keep expecting the phone to ring. You keep forgetting, and then remembering, and then having to forget again just to get through the afternoon. My mother, Judith Hale, had passed 8 years earlier from ovarian cancer. So it was just me now, and my younger sister Pam, who lives in Tucson with her husband and their 2 kids. Pam flew in the next morning. We sat in the house on Chestnut Ridge Drive where we'd grown up and didn't talk much, because there wasn't much to say that the silence wasn't already saying better. The house went quiet in a way that houses do when the person who filled them is gone. The furniture was the same. The photos on the wall were the same. The hook by the back door still had Robert's fleece jacket hanging from it, the dark green one he'd worn every fall for 15 years, and neither of us moved it for the first 3 days. I'm the executor of the estate. That became clear fairly quickly, not because Robert had spelled it out in detail. His will was simple, handwritten, filed with an attorney in downtown Boise named James Croft, who handled it with the quiet efficiency of someone who has sat across from grieving people for 30 years. But because Pam had her hands full with the kids, and I was the one still in Boise, still in the house where Robert had lived, still driving past the street signs I'd grown up reading. 2 months after the funeral, I started the process of clearing the house. Not to sell it, not yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation with myself. But there were things to go through, boxes to sort, decisions to make about what gets donated, and what gets kept, and what gets quietly thrown away. Because nobody needs to inherit someone else's collection of hardware store receipts from 2009. The workshop was the last thing on the list. Robert had built it himself in 1998, a converted room at the end of the back hallway, just past the laundry. He'd framed it out over a long weekend and drywalled it himself, which was something he was proud of, even though the corner seams were visibly imperfect if you looked closely. He'd installed a solid core door with a deadbolt. Not a chain, not a padlock, a deadbolt, the kind you need a key for from both sides. I had asked about it twice in my life, once at 12 when I tried the handle and found it locked, and Robert appeared from the kitchen like he'd been waiting, saying only, "That's my space, Miles. Come help me finish the dishes." Easy, unalarmed. No edge in his voice, just a redirect. Once at 22, when I'd come home from college for Thanksgiving and made some comment about whatever he was working on in there, and he'd smiled and said, "Oh, the usual," which told me exactly nothing, and I let it go because I was 22, and not particularly interested in what my father did alone in a room. By 40, the workshop had simply become part of the architecture of living in that house. A door you walked past. The same way you don't question the water heater closet or the panel box in the utility room. It was there. It stayed shut. That was just how things were. It was my friend Dennis Kowalski who finally said what he was thinking. Dennis and I have been friends since 7th grade at Bora Middle School. He is the kind of person who speaks before he edits himself, which is either his best quality or his worst, depending on what day it is. He drove up from his place in Meridian on a Saturday in late April to help me carry boxes down to my truck, and we were standing in the back hallway taking a break when he looked at the workshop door and then looked at me. "You gone in there yet?" "No." He tilted his head a little. "You planning to?" I looked at the door. The deadbolt was chrome, and there was a small scratch near the keyhole that I had never noticed before. "Eventually," I said. "Miles." He said it the way he's been saying my name since we were 13, like the word itself is a gentle correction. "Your dad is gone." That door has been locked your whole life. Don't you want to know? I told him I wasn't ready. He accepted that without pushing it further, which is something Dennis does that makes him better than he admits. We went back to carrying boxes, and I told myself I would get to it when I got to it. The key had been on Robert's key ring, which the hospital had handed me in a small Ziploc bag along with his wallet and his watch, and a folded grocery list he'd apparently had in his pocket, still unfinished. Milk, grapefruit, the coffee he liked from the co-op on Bannock Street. I had identified every key on that ring within 2 weeks except one. It was a standard deadbolt key, brass, nothing unusual about it. I had tried it on the front door and the back door, and the storage room in the garage, and come up empty. I knew what it opened. I just wasn't ready to open it. The following week, a Tuesday afternoon in early May, I stood alone in the back hallway. Pam was back in Tucson. Dennis had gone home. The house was quiet. I had a cup of coffee going cold on the kitchen counter, and nothing else scheduled for the rest of the day. I stood in front of the workshop door for maybe 2 full minutes before I took the key out of my pocket, put it in the lock, and turned it. The door swung inward. The room smelled like sawdust and something else, paper, maybe, and something faintly metallic. I reached for the light switch on the right wall and found it without looking. The way you find things in a house you grew up in. I don't entirely know how to describe what I saw when the light came on, because the first few seconds my brain was working to categorize something it didn't have a category for. It was not a workshop. There were no power tools, no workbench, no half-finished furniture project. There was a folding table along the left wall with a desktop computer on it, old, a tower model, and beside it, a neat stack of external hard drives, 6 of them, labeled with years in black marker. There were shelves on the right wall, 3 of them, custom built and level, lined with manila folders, 3-ring binders, and stacked cardboard boxes with years written on their spines in Robert's handwriting. The back wall had a corkboard, full, every inch covered, with photographs, index cards, printouts, and lengths of string connecting certain items to others, red string pinned at each end. There was a yellow notepad on the table beside the computer with a list on it in Robert's handwriting, mid-sentence, like he had put it down intending to come back. I walked to the corkboard first. The photographs were of places mostly. Buildings. Street corners. A few showed people, but not people a school, a community center, a parking lot. There were printouts of what looked like financial documents, county records, property maps, index cards with names and dates written in Robert's precise slanted printing. I didn't understand what I was looking at. I pulled one of the binders from the shelf. On the spine, Robert had written Ridgecrest, 2011-2014. I opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, photocopied documents, highlighted sections of what looked like city council minutes. There were sticky notes with Robert's handwriting, C attached, confirmed 314, cross-reference with Exhibit C. It was organized with an attention to detail that I recognized from other parts of his life. The way he kept his tax files, the way he maintained the car, meticulous, deliberate. I sat down on a metal stool at the folding table and kept reading. It took me a while to understand what I was looking at, longer than I want to admit. But when it finally clicked, it clicked all the way. My father, Robert Hale, retired high school civics teacher from Boise High School, had spent the last 25 years of his life as an amateur investigative journalist, not published, not affiliated with any outlet, working completely alone, out of this 12-by-14 room at the end of a hallway in a house in Boise, Idaho, documenting local government corruption, zoning violations, bid rigging, and contract fraud in Ada County. The Ridgecrest binder was about a low-income housing development in 2011 that had been awarded to a contractor with ties to a sitting city councilman at a cost significantly above competing bids, with the contract documents amended after the fact. Robert had the original bid records. He had the amended versions. He had a timeline showing the dates of the changes and the dates of the council votes. He had the names. I pulled another binder. Meridian Water District, 2007-2009. Another pattern. A no-bid contract for infrastructure repair, awarded to a company whose principal owner had contributed to 3 county commissioner campaigns in the preceding 18 months. Robert had the AFC filings. He had the county records. He had everything laid out with the same quiet, careful logic he had used to teach 17-year-olds how government was supposed to work. I sat in that room for a long time. I called Dennis, eventually, because that is what you do when something happens that you cannot process alone. "I need you to come back," I said. "What's in there?" I looked around at the shelves, the corkboard, the labeled hard drives, the notepad with the unfinished list. "A lot," I said. I'll explain when you get here. Dennis sat on the floor of the workshop, reading through the Ridgecrest binder for almost 45 minutes while I went through the shelves. He didn't say much while he read. That is unusual for Dennis. When he finished, he set the binder down carefully, the way you set something down when you're not sure of its weight. Miles, he said, your dad was the only person who noticed. I didn't answer because I was reading something from one of the boxes. A stack of letters. Not printed, handwritten on standard letter paper tied together with a binder clip, each one dated, each one addressed to a different person or institution. The Idaho Statesman, the Ada County Prosecutor's Office, the Idaho Secretary of State, the FBI field office in Salt Lake City. Robert had been mailing these, not just documenting, sending, reporting, for years. I went through the box looking for responses. There were some. A form letter from the county prosecutor's office dated 2009, acknowledging receipt. A brief reply from a Statesman editor in 2014 saying the paper would look into the matter, which apparently they had not, because the follow-up letter Robert sent 6 months later was still in the box, unsent, the envelope sealed but never mailed. A response from the Secretary of State's office in 2016 that was 2 paragraphs of procedural language that said nothing. Mostly, there were no responses. Robert had been sending letters into a silence that sent very little back. I sat down on the stool again. I didn't cry, not in that moment. I felt something that wasn't exactly grief and wasn't exactly anger. It was closer to the feeling of realizing, very late, that the person you thought you knew had a dimension you had walked past every day for decades without seeing. My father had taught civics for 31 years. He had taught kids how representative government worked, what oversight mechanisms existed, why those mechanisms mattered, and then he had come home every evening and spent his hours documenting what happened when those mechanisms failed. Quietly, without byline, without recognition, without telling anyone, including his own son. Dennis ordered food from the Thai place on Overland Road that we'd been going to since our 20s. We ate it on the workshop floor, which felt like the right place to be, surrounded by 25 years of my father's unpublished work. I found a legal pad near the computer and started taking notes, not because I had a plan yet, but because it felt important to write things down, which was probably something I had learned from Robert without knowing it. There were 6 external hard drives. I found a notebook, small, spiral, tucked between 2 binders, in which Robert had written the contents of each drive in order. Drive 1 through 6, each labeled with a date range, each with a brief description of what it contained. He was organized. He was always organized. He just wasn't visible. I found on the bottom shelf in a green accordion folder labeled for M, a sealed envelope with my name on it. My first name in Robert's handwriting. Just Miles. I held it for a while before I opened it. Inside was a letter, 4 pages, written on the yellow legal pad paper he kept at his desk. Not the workshop desk, the desk in the living room, the one I had done homework at as a kid. I recognized the paper. I won't tell you every word. Some of it belongs to me, in the way certain things only belong to the person they were written for. But I can tell you the shape of it. He started with an apology. Not a dramatic one. Robert was not a dramatic man. He said he was sorry he hadn't found the right moment to explain. He said he had thought about how to begin that conversation for a long time, and that every version of it felt either too small or too large, and that he kept telling himself there would be a better time, and then time did what time does. He explained why he had started. In 1998, he had read a story in the Statesman about a rezoning decision in North Boise that he recognized, from his civics curriculum, as procedurally wrong in a specific and documentable way. He had written a letter to the editor. It was not published. He had written to the county. No response. And he had thought, all right, if no one is going to look at this, I will look at it myself. And he had converted the back room and started filing. He said he had kept it separate from us, from Pam and from me. Not to deceive us, but because he did not want it to become ours before we could choose it. He said that working on something like this requires a kind of obsessive attention that isn't healthy to grow up around. He said he had watched it become his primary relationship with his evenings, and he did not want to give that to us as children. He wanted us to have a father, not a cause. By the time you were adults, he wrote, it felt too large to explain in pieces, and too important to explain wrong. I kept thinking I needed the right moment. Your mother knew. She was better at waiting for right moments than I ever was. After she was gone, I lost track of the timeline. I kept thinking, next year, next summer. When things settle, he described what was in the drives. He described the documentation system, how to read it, how the binders corresponded to the digital files, what the color coding on the corkboard meant. He wrote it like instructions, which was also very Robert. At the end he wrote, "I don't know that any of this will matter in the end. I don't know that it should be anyone's problem to carry forward. But I spent a long time on it, and I thought it deserved to exist somewhere other than inside my own head. You've always been careful with things that matter. I trust you to know what to do with this, or to find someone who does." I sat in the workshop for a long time after I finished reading. Dennis had fallen asleep against the wall, which is something Dennis does in moments of extended stillness. I sat alone with my father's letter, and the 6 hard drives, and the corkboard full of red string, and thought about what it means to spend 25 years doing something carefully and quietly that nobody asked you to do, with no promise of outcome, and no one watching. The following week, I drove to the newsroom of the Idaho Statesman on Front Street and asked to speak with an investigative reporter. The woman who came out to the lobby was named Carrie Olson, 38, with the slightly distracted air of someone working 3 stories at once. I told her my father had just died. I told her he had left behind 25 years of documented research into local government contracting in Ada County. I told her I had hard drives and binders and a corkboard that I didn't entirely know what to do with. She looked at me for a moment. "How organized is it?" "Very," I said. She said, "Give me until Thursday." Carrie came to the house on Chestnut Ridge Drive on a Thursday afternoon with another reporter, a younger man named Pete Sager, 29, who carried a laptop bag and did not say much but took notes on everything. They spent 4 hours in the workshop. They went through 2 of the binders. Pete photographed the corkboard from every angle. Carrie sat at the folding table and opened one of the hard drives and read through files for an hour without speaking. When they came out of the workshop, Carrie stood in the hallway and looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. "Your father was meticulous," she said. "He taught civics," I said. "He cared about how the documentation was supposed to work. Did he ever try to get this published?" "He sent letters. Mostly nothing came back." She was quiet for a moment. "We're going to need to talk to our editor." 3 weeks later she called me. The Statesman was going to assign a team to verify and report on the Ridgecrest material. It would take months. There were no guarantees about what would come of it. But they were going to look. That was enough. For right now, that was more than enough. There was one more thing, and it came in June, 2 months after I opened the workshop door. I had found in one of the boxes a stack of correspondence that was different from the rest. Not letters to institutions. Letters from people. A handful of them from different years, responding to something Robert had apparently sent them directly. A retired school teacher. A small property owner in Meridian. A woman who ran a nonprofit serving low-income residents in the Bench neighborhood south of downtown. Her name was Adrienne Mort. She had written to Robert in 2017, and her letter was short, 3 paragraphs, but I read it 4 times. She wrote that she had spent 2 years trying to understand why a community center project in her neighborhood had been defunded at the last minute in 2015, after the budget had already been approved. She had been told it was a revenue shortfall. She had never been able to verify that. And then she had received, unsolicited, a package from a Robert Hale at an address on Chestnut Ridge Drive. Inside was a set of documented county budget records, showing that the funding had not been eliminated due to a shortfall, but had been reallocated, quietly, between 2 budget cycles, to a different infrastructure project in a higher-income district, awarded to a contractor Robert had documented before. "I don't know who you are," Adrienne wrote, "or why you sent this to me. But I used what you sent to file a formal complaint with the county auditor. I don't know if anything will come of it. I just wanted you to know it didn't disappear." I looked the organization up. It was still operating. The community center had eventually been funded through a combination of a federal community development grant and private donations, and it had opened in 2019. I found a news story about the opening. There was a photograph. The building was a single-story converted space on Americana Boulevard with a mural on the side wall and a sign out front. I called the number on the organization's website. The person who answered told me Adrienne Morse still ran the place, and after I explained who I was, she put me through. Adrienne was quiet for a moment when I said my father's name. "He passed away in February," I told her. "I know," she said. "I saw the obituary. I thought about calling. I didn't know if I should." A pause. "I'm so sorry I don't have the right word for what he was." "Neither do I said. She told me she had shown Robert's documentation to a local attorney, who had confirmed it was solid. She had filed the complaint. Nothing formal had come of it directly, But the county had restructured its budget transparency procedures the following year, citing an internal audit. She didn't know if the two things were connected. She suspected they were. He never asked for anything, she said. He just sent the information. I always assumed he was a journalist. He was a civics teacher, I said. Another silence, on the line. The center has a little library, she said finally. We let neighborhood kids come in after school and use it. I don't know if this is strange to say, but would you want to bring something of his? A book? Or, I don't know, something. So he's in there. I brought his copy of Robert Caro's The Power Broker. It was the most read book on his shelf. The spine was cracked. There were pencil marks in the margins on almost every other page. Adrian put it in the library on the Americana Boulevard Community Center's one bookshelf, between a paperback dictionary and a field guide to Idaho birds. I don't know that the kids who use that library will ever read it. Maybe one of them will. Maybe none of them will, and it'll just sit there between the dictionary and the bird book gathering dust. But it's there. In a building that exists, in part, because Robert Hale sat in a 12-by-14 room on Chestnut Ridge Drive for 25 years and paid attention. The workshop is still there. I haven't changed anything. I did add a second desk chair, because I've been going in there more often now. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Dennis, sometimes with Carrie Olson from The Statesman, who has become something like a collaborator, or at least a reader, of what Robert left behind. We're working through it. The Ridgecrest series ran in April and is ongoing. There are other binders. There is a lot of red string still on the corkboard. I've added some of my own notes to the legal pad, in a different handwriting, which is how it should be. Some mornings I go in there before I start my day and I sit at the folding table and drink coffee and look at what my father built in the quiet years when no one was watching and nothing was guaranteed and the work mattered anyway. I don't know yet what will come of any of it. That's something Robert understood before I did. You document carefully, you send what you have, and then you let it find its way. The key is on my keychain now, right where he kept it. I never repainted the door.